in this short podcast, you're going to look at the long-term basic causes of the English Civil War. Um, the English Civil War was one of the most seismic events in more English history of the last 1,000 years, for lots of different reasons. And this short podcast will outline the kind of growing tensions that took place between the king and disaffected parts of the country, namely Parliament. So, firstly and fundamentally, with all things early modern in this era, is that we need to understand what the religious makeup, the religious background of the country was like in the 1620s and 1630s. England by now was predominantly a Protestant country, with the Church of England as the king, with the king as its head. But within there, we still have some tensions. In the 100 or so years since the break with Rome, we still have a sizable proportion of the country being Catholic. But within the Protestant faith itself, we have divisions as well. In some of the most extreme parts of this religious of the religion is of course the Puritan movement and the Presbyterian movement in Scotland. Puritans were in England, and these follow the lines very similar to that of John Calvin. Calvinist, which was very strict adherence to the church in terms of its basic practices and rituals. Very anti-Catholic, very anti-papal, papist. Didn't like the Pope, and they believed that church services should be plain and simple. That the Bible should be the reference for interpretation. Of course, now the Bible was in wide circulation because of the printing press. And in many ways, the Puritans were happy to follow the lead of the king if the king's religious views were in favour or were in line with what the Puritans themselves believed to be the true Protestant faith. And so this divide was simmering along all the way. And what we see in the 1620s is anti-Catholic propaganda, pamphleteering by many Puritans that are spreading this hatred and this continuing divide. At the centre of all this, we have a new king in 1625, Charles Stuart, who was the second son of James VI of Scotland, who later became James I of England and Scotland. James I had was a sickly child and he wasn't destined to be king. His elder brother was until in 1612 he died. And when Charles became king in 1625, Charles was very much a strong believer in what we call the divine right of kings. Now, this is a concept, an idea that centers around this belief that God alone anointed him king, and that no one in England or Wales, Scotland has the right to challenge his authority. And during this period, Charles didn't do himself any favours. For example, he married a French princess, Henrietta Maria, who was a Catholic. And of course, that was in many circles, an unpopular choice to make. And Charles himself was a practicing Protestant, but he in many ways adhered to the high church values of following rituals and services which were quite similar to a Catholic service. And of course, you can see how that would anger the Puritan circles in the UK, in England, not the UK. The UK hasn't come along for a while yet, but within England and Scotland. And that just kind of distances the king from wide sections of the Protestant community, namely the Puritans and the Presbyterians. So there we have an outline of kind of Charles himself and his initial role in the course of the English Civil War, and also the role of religion, this divide that has taken place, not just between Catholic and Protestant, but within the Protestant faith about how best to run the country. It's also worth noting at this stage that when he became king, and many kings feel the need to do this, he saw his right to wage war, and Charles was keen to go to war with Spain initially, and to do so he had to go to Parliament to ask for finances, to raise taxes to do so. And by now in the 1620s, Parliament, especially the Commons, the House of Commons in Parliament, was dominated by wealthy landowners and merchants, and these people were reluctant to hand over money to the king to fight his private wars as they saw it, and they refused. And we'll look more at this continuing tension. Charles's, as we move on to the more short-term causes, Charles's initial reaction to Parliament's refusal is to dissolve it, to close it down for a whole year. And upon reopening Parliament a year later in 1627, they still disagree, and so he dissolved it again. And so we begin to see now this rising tension between Parliament and the king. So there we have it, the short-term, so the long-term causes of the English Civil War: religion, finance on behalf of the king, and ultimately the king himself and the actions he got up to.